Hey, this is Rev, back with another video. Today I'm going to show some circuits and redstone tricks that involve observers, which you might find helpful in your builds. A lot of these I've used previously, but I've never really explained them, so this video will give me a chance to do that. Some more experienced redstoners might already know how to do these, but if you're new here or want to learn more about redstone, you can watch the whole thing, and if you want, go comment how many you already knew. So the first one is using a circuit like this. You can cause these pistons here to retract, and then have these ones here pull their blocks at this level like this by sending two game tick pulses separated by 2 game ticks to it, and that can be achieved with a torch burnout. So that's an example of how to do one. We just have, let's set this up again. But pretty much we just create a torch burnout like that, and it will pull these pistons into here, and that will cause these ones down here to retract first, even though they're only bud powered, just because of the order that the pistons update. And so it's possible to do it with a burnout, but this is quite large and sometimes can be hard to control. So an easy way to do it is using an observer like this. So you have any piston here and an observer pointing out of the body of it. You just give the piston a 1 tick pulse, and it will do the exact same thing. I'll set up again. And once again, we give the piston a 1 tick pulse, and it will give our 2 pulses of this observer to this line. So that's one way, and it's fairly well known. But another way you can do it, which I haven't seen that much of, is 2-ticking a piston and taking an output from its head, like this. So if I just give this piston here a 2-tick pulse, you can see it will do the same thing. And a note is that this only works with pistons. If I do something like this, just do a 2-tick repeater into here, like that, it will only give 1 pulse, so it has to be just like that. So it has to be a piston coming from it. So you can show it one more time, like that, going into a redstone here. And when I pulse this, there it will retract, just like that. Okay, so our next circuit has to do with toggles using observers. So it's probably pretty well known that when you push an observer, it will have a piston, it'll give a pulse to this piston, but when you retract it with a 1 or 2 game tick signal to a sticky piston, it won't cause our piston here to get a pulse. However, when you do this with any other component besides a piston, or almost any component besides a piston, it will actually give a pulse. So if I retract this here, you can see our lamp turns on, just like that. And it's the same if I do it with like a repeater here. So our repeater pulses, I retract it, and our repeater pulses again. However, it is possible to get a have no signal come out of the observer when it's retracted with one other component besides a piston, and that is using a comparator here. So as you can see, when I extend our observer, a pulse comes out of there. When I track it, nothing powers that comparator. So see a pulse from the comparator, and then nothing. And one note is that this, you do have to have a repeater coming out of the comparator, or else if I do something like this, the comparator just won't power at all. And doing something like this, see, it won't power either. Even though that technically is powering the repeater has to be directly after the comparator, like that. So see, it pulses, and it doesn't pulse again. So this next series of circuits has to do with 0 ticks and repeaters. So an easy way you can create a 0 tick pulse using an observer, just like this here. So we retract our observer, and it powers this block, which will power this piston. And because this block here bud powers this piston here, it will actually cause it to update and spit its block back up, which will leave us with a 0 tick going to this piston, just like that. However, this here can be unreliable in some edge cases. So easier way and more reliable way to create a 0 tick from an observer is 2 ticking an observer with a piston, or 2 ticking a piston with an observer on it that is bud powered. So in this case, you see that we have a piston here and then a sticky piston here with an observer on it, and that'll give a 0 tick pulse to that piston. So there's our 0 tick, and it has to be like this. You can't just have the observer like that. See, there's no pulse that comes out, and this is just because of the order that components update within a tick. Because it's set up like this, it will give enough time for that observer to give its pulse. So, again, you can see we have our 0 tick here, and it doesn't have to be just this configuration. As long as our piston here is being bud powered and updated with another piston, it will give a 0 tick pulse. So we can also have it like this. The only important thing is that you do not want to have this piston here be in any place where it or the piston head can be updated by this repeater. So as an example, a setup like this, where we have this piston here which updates this piston, will not work. So if you see I pulse it, nothing happens, and that's because when this is powered like this, when this repeater depowers, it will update this piston here through this block here, which will cause it to retract prematurely before, instead of having this piston here update it after the repeater turns off. So you see, if I 2 tick it, we won't get a pulse from it. But if it's set up like this instead, this here will give a pulse, like that. So our next circuit is an easy way to offset delays by 1 game tick without using any pistons or things like that. So as you know, a repeater will add delay in increments of 2 game ticks. So this here adds 2 game ticks, that's 4, that's 6, and that's 8 game ticks of delay. So it's impossible to add an odd amount with repeaters in almost every case. However, an easy way to do this is using scaffolding. So as you can see right now, this circuit here will add 2 game ticks. Well, technically 1 game tick from this repeater because of the input bug. Just for the sake of explanation, there will be 2 game ticks added by this repeater here, 1 game tick added by this circuit here, then 2 game ticks from the observer. And here we have 2 game ticks from our repeater here, and then 2 game ticks from our observer. So we should have 5 game ticks of delay, or 4 game ticks of delay going into this lamp, and 5 going into this lamp. As you can see, this one turns on just slightly after this one here. However, we can, if we add 1 tick of delay here, which makes it a total of 4 game ticks here, now we should have 6 game ticks going to this lamp here, and 5 here. So now this one here should turn on slightly before this one. As you can see, it's the same thing the other way around. And it's also possible to actually expand a circuit like this here to add more delay. So each one of these scaffolds will update 1 game tick after the next. So this one here has 1 game tick of delay, and this has 2 here, 3 on this one, 4 and 5. And so if I just set up a line of observers getting outputs from them, you should see that we will get sort of a wave going down our line here, just like that. And this one here should update at the exact same time as this lamp here. So you can see they're both in sync. So our last set of circuits here has to do with turning 2 pulses separated by 2 game ticks into 1, similar to what we had for our setup over here. It's the same like sequence of pulses, and this turns them into 1 pulse, which is detected by an observer in a fairly compact way. So here we have the same setup where we have a repeater which powers the body of a piston, and we just have an observer output. And what we do is we have a dispenser here with water in it, which is detected by an observer. So you see if I pulse this, we only get this piston up here only pulses 1 time, whereas if I take an output here, you'll see that this observer actually pulses twice. So So you see our piston here gets 2 pulses, and this observer here turns it into 1 pulse, which goes to that piston. And it works the same way for this setup as well, where we have our 2-ticked piston head. So you get 1 pulse here. And same thing here using our burnout. You see that this redstone cross here pulses twice, which will cause the water to dispense and pull it back into the dispenser, and we get 1 pulse here. And this water here will never flow, so you don't have to worry about redstone erasing. I could actually have a redstone dot right here. And you see it's completely fine. If you are worried about like this accidentally getting powered when you're building something, or if your door gets spammed, an easy way to do that is just to use a stair here and the block here. And this will ensure that the water won't, even if it's just dispensed out, it won't flow anywhere. So our water is staying in its space here. It's not going to destroy any redstone, and this doesn't affect our output at all. It's just like that. Once again, we're only getting 1 pulse to that piston. So that's it for the video. It's not too long, but I hope the concepts shown here come in useful for whatever you're building. If you knew them already, you can go and comment which ones and how many of them you already knew. Anyways, I hope this helped. Thanks for watching.